I lay in bed, feeling weakness envelop my body like a heavy blanket, pinning me down and not allowing me to breathe freely. It seemed as if every cell in me was reaching for peace, and only a thin thread of consciousness kept me from completely sinking into oblivion. Jonathan, my husband, was sitting next to me, his fingers lightly touching my arm, as if trying to convey a warmth that I no longer felt. I turned to him, a look full of anxiety and confusion, but in response he smiled. This smile was so close, so familiar and childishly calm. "You know, I only married you because you're the boss's daughter," he suddenly said with a certain coldness in his voice, in which I didn't hear a hint of a joke. The words pierced my ears like lightning, causing everything around me to stop. His eyes reflected a wall invisible to me before, behind which a part of his nature unknown to me was hidden, and, as if dissolving into his gaze, I saw him turn away from me. For a moment it was as if I saw our past years together, how I knitted scarves and gloves for him, taking out every loop with awe and love, putting all the warmth I could into it. Every time I gave him my work, I waited for his smile, words of gratitude, which meant more to me than anything. I didn't even imagine that those warm clothes, my work and time, could be discarded so indifferently, as if they didn't have the slightest value for him. Did he always think of me as just his boss's daughter, a stepping stone to success? I looked into his face, trying to find answers, and couldn't help but chuckle at the thought that he thinks everything is going the way he would like, that he is the rightful owner of his life and my feelings. Deep down, I knew that if he could realize how wrong he was, maybe then he would see me for real. My name is Kelly Riley, and I've been Jonathan's wife for 6 years. We don't have children, but our life has always seemed happy to me, at least I tried to believe in it. Jonathan, as always, is immersed in work, often spends days away, sometimes even forgets to warn when he returns later than usual. Sometimes I feel lonely, but on the days when he stayed at home, he always tried to do everything to make up for his absence, arranging quiet evenings for two, where we just sat next to each other, his arm hugged me, and we talked about the future. I met him through my father, who was his boss. Jonathan was sure that the role of housewife would be to my liking. And, naively believing in this, I agreed, because the prospect of free time and the opportunity to take care of our house and support my husband seemed to me a natural continuation of our union. Since then, I began to master various activities, sports, sewing, but none of them brought me the joy that I found in knitting. Every winter I knitted new scarves and gloves for Jonathan, and although the first attempts were clumsy, he accepted them with a smile, saying that I was doing well. At such moments, he made me happy, and I began to dream of the day when we could knit something together, perhaps for our child. But dreams remain dreams. 3 years after the wedding, everything began to change. One evening, as I was waiting for him to return home, suddenly the world spun around me. The room began to blur, and it was as if I was plunging into deep darkness. The next thing I remember is a cold touch on the hospital bed and muffled sounds around. The doctor's voice, dry and formal, informed Jonathan that my condition was serious, that I would have to get used to living with him, even though it was not life-threatening. I felt like I was in someone else's body, and only Jonathan, holding my hand tightly, reminded me that I still existed. I sat there, confused and immobilized, Jonathan's words burning like icy fire. The air around us seemed to thicken, and I felt the cold shackle my heart, already tormented by long months of loneliness, when he began to move away, coming to the hospital less and less often. But now, in front of me was not the Jonathan I knew. His face, usually warm and attentive, was dry, cold as a stone, and his eyes shone with a strange, almost malevolent fire. My hand was still resting on the soft wool of the gloves I had knitted for him, gloves into which I had put every breath, every thread of love and hope. I dreamed about how we would return home together, how we would share quiet evenings again, but these dreams seemed so far away now, as if they were part of someone else's life. Jonathan did not even touch the gloves, only glanced at them casually, as if in front of him was just an unnecessary object that happened to be in his hands. "Are you still doing this, Kelly?" His voice was full of cold contempt. "I married you because of your father, and those scarves and gloves of yours, it's all petty. It's just annoying, you know? Who even wears such a thing now?" His every word felt like a blow. The promises he made to me at the beginning of our marriage sounded like a broken record in my head. He said that we would go through everything together, that he would always be there for me, that his feelings for me would be stronger than any difficulties. I tried to convince myself that his infrequent visits were just a consequence of his busy schedule. Deep down, I knew it was self-deception. "Isn't it obvious?" Jonathan grinned, and his face assumed an expression of tired indifference. "Kelly, you've always been just the boss's daughter to me. I thought I could handle this marriage, but your illness. It's like you're tied to me now with a chain that I never wanted." At that moment, something broke completely in me. The memories of all our years together scrolled through my head, and I saw how futile my hopes and dreams were. His words were like the cold truth, highlighting all my feelings, all those moments that I appreciated, and he saw only as an unnecessary burden. The stranger who opened the door looked puzzled, as if he hadn't expected to see me standing on the threshold, staring intently at other people's faces, in which now I saw only indifference and surprise. I felt uninvited waves of confusion and emptiness overwhelm me. Deep down I knew that this house already had new owners, that my past had become alienated and forgotten, but I still felt a painful attachment to this place, as if a part of me remained in the walls, between which I had once been. I was trying to create my own comfort, to build my own little universe with Jonathan. The new owner, a man in his 30s, politely invited us in, probably thinking that we were some old friends of the previous owners. My gaze automatically darted over the familiar outlines of the rooms, and with each passing second reality blurred the remaining memories. Jonathan had stripped me of this house, this life that I had tried in vain to keep, like a warm cloth over my heart, through which the cold of disappointment was now breaking through. A young woman came out into the corridor. A child was in her arms, who looked at us curiously with huge bright eyes. There was something reassuring and warm in that look, like a promise that life would go on. She politely asked how she could help us, and I suddenly realized that I had no right to disturb them with my story and my wounds. It was as if I had forgotten that I had come here with something important, but everything seemed so far away and unnecessary, like shadows at sunset gradually disappearing from the horizon. "Forgive us for disturbing you," my father said slowly, putting into his voice all the gentleness he was capable of in this situation. "We just got the wrong house." I only had time to take one last look at the living room doorway framed by cozy curtains, the very living room where Jonathan and I once sat with cups of tea, discussing where we would go for the weekend, that we would have a Christmas dinner by the fireplace and invite friends. How strange it was to see this scene, but without my participation. As I left, I felt my father's warm hand on my shoulder for a moment, and only this touch kept me from bursting into tears right on the street, at the doors that were once my home. A sharp autumn wind was blowing outside, which instantly sobered me up, spurring me to speed up my pace, as if trying to help me leave this house and the memory of it in the past faster. My mother walked beside me without saying a word, and although she didn't ask anything, I could see how intently she was following my every move, as if trying to catch exactly what I was feeling at that moment. My ex-husband suddenly lost confidence when my father handed him a document, unfolded so that every word clearly caught his eye. His smug expression froze, and his gaze slowly shifted from my father to me, as if for the first time he realized that he was not in the center of the stage. Now it was his game on someone else's Jonathan, where we dictated the rules, and there was a flash of uncertainty in his face, like a shadow of confusion that he could not completely hide. "The house is on my land," my father began calmly, restraining his anger, which seemed to break out in a stern tone. "Therefore, Jonathan, you had no legal right to sell it without our consent. Everything you received from the sale must be returned. I'm sure your generosity extends to this deal, since you value your generosity so highly." Jonathan swallowed nervously, his cocky grin faded, and his gaze darted around the room like a man trapped. He clearly did not expect such a turnaround, and after the last meeting, where he listened so indifferently to my pleas for at least some respect for the past, it seemed to him that he had arranged everything perfectly. But this document in my father's hands now was like a sentence, under which he had neither strength nor influence. "It's some kind of mistake," he muttered, trying to pass off his confused expression as a slight negligence, which, however, did not deceive us. "I had all the documents on the ownership of the house, and you probably didn't update your details, otherwise all this would have been registered with the agency long ago." My father raised an eyebrow, not hiding his sarcastic surprise. "A mistake? There is no error in this document. The land has been in my family for 3 generations, and we don't intend to let it go at your whim." Jonathan didn't know what to say anymore. He looked around as if hoping that someone would suddenly take his side, but all he saw were the cold stares of my parents and my calm face. It was as if I was standing apart from this scene, but I felt a long, suppressed sense of satisfaction rising in my soul, not from revenge, no, but from justice finally restored. Jonathan tensed, as if the whole scene had turned into a frozen nightmare, and now he was required to find a way out, which, as he realized, was not there. There was a mixture of disbelief and uncertainty in his gaze, clumsily hidden behind a strained mask of impassibility. He seemed to be carefully weighing my every word, hoping to catch, perhaps, a hint of bluff. But I could see that his calculating look was already confused, and behind his assumed self-confidence there was deep confusion. "Well, Jonathan?" I said with a slight touch of ease, as if this meeting was nothing more than a friendly conversation, and at the same time I did not take my eyes off him attentively. "You have the opportunity to solve everything without creating further problems for yourself. The family is already aware of the situation and is ready to negotiate, but, of course, they want to avoid unnecessary lawsuits. You don't want to hurt them, do you?" He remained silent, clearly realizing that any answer he gave would only confirm his position in a desperate situation. He took a quick look around the room, as if hoping to find support or at least an escape route, but he only came across the stern faces of my parents and my calm, unwavering determination. He pursed his lips for a moment and, suppressing his irritation with difficulty, muttered in a barely audible voice, "And what do you suggest?" His voice no longer sounded with the haughty confidence that it once had. Now there was nervousness in it caused by a prospect for which he was completely unprepared. I leaned back, giving him time to realize that it would take more than the usual manipulations and pretentious generosity from him to solve this issue. "As I said," I continued softly, "you can settle the situation by paying back the money for the land. Thus, the family will become the rightful owner of both the house and the plot, which will save them from having to conduct lengthy proceedings. But, considering the value of the land, it will not be a small amount." Jonathan nervously ran a hand through his hair, obviously restraining an outburst of anger. He was used to control, to the ability to influence the decisions of others, but now the fate of the situation was not in his hands, and he felt it. I knew that everything was bubbling up in him. I knew how he would like to get up, turn around and leave, slamming the door, as if refusing to talk, but at the same time I understood that his ego and fear of legal consequences kept him here, on this conversation. There must be something else. "Somehow we can come to an agreement, easier," he muttered, casting a glance at us, in which there was still hope that we could commute the sentence. "Perhaps, compensation," The amount for the land is not that big. My father, who had been keeping a tense silence until that moment, smiled faintly. The amount, Jonathan, is not small, he said coldly, and considering that we could request rent, make no mistake, this is the best option you could get. Jonathan clearly tried to hide his confusion, but his hand involuntarily twitched again, as if he wanted to grab something that would give him support. He looked back at me and my parents, as if he was looking for the slightest sign of sympathy from one of us, but he came across an inflexibility hidden behind calm expressions. "All right," he finally managed, trying to maintain his remaining dignity. "I'll take that amount on myself." His voice sounded hoarse, subdued, like a man admitting inevitable defeat. I nodded, and my father pulled out another document that we had drawn up in advance. Jonathan was sitting in front of us. His world seemed to be collapsing with every sentence I said. I could see his confidence disappearing, leaving only emptiness in its place. He was no longer the arrogant, self-satisfied man who always wanted to be one step ahead. Instead, there was a man in front of me who realized that all his efforts, his attempts to use me as a springboard for his career, had ended in failure. My father, whose eyes were now glowing with quiet satisfaction, added the finishing touches to this scenario. His voice was calm, but full of firm determination. His words sounded almost like a verdict, final and not subject to appeal. "You know, Jonathan, people at work don't want to deal with you anymore. Your colleagues lost respect for you with every step you took when you used my daughter. Those who once looked at you as a capable employee now see only your true nature. Soon you will probably be left without the support that our family provided for you." Gradually, a wave of confusion washed over Jonathan's face, and his attempts to preserve the remnants of pride looked only pathetic. He realized that there was nothing to cling to anymore. All his tricks had turned against him. His arrogance, with which he had come to this meeting, had dissolved, leaving only vulnerability. "Well, Jonathan," I said, folding my arms as if it were an official meeting, "you have a choice. Either you pay compensation for moral damage, rent for land and provide the family with a comfortable move, or you return the house and land to us, compensating the family for the costs of their move. Anyway, as you can see, you're losing." He paused. The words stuck in his throat, and his face was pale, as if he realized that in this game he had become a pawn, not a player. My calm face, which he was used to seeing obedient and submissive, now took on a new look, determination and confidence, which he clearly did not expect. After a minute's pause, he looked up, and I noticed a glint of tears that he was trying to hold back. Perhaps it was a moment of realization that his life, which seemed to be such a successful tangle of manipulations and lies, was bursting at the seams. It seemed to be the end of his career, his pride, his arrogance. "I agree," he said in a strangled voice, realizing that he had no other choice. The rest of the meeting was held in tense silence, and my father, as if completing the picture, told me later that the rumors with which he had stirred up Jonathan's office had spread throughout the company and reached the top management. Now Jonathan had not only no reputation, but also no future in his position. His expected promotion disappeared along with respect, and soon he had no choice but to submit his resignation, unable to withstand the pressure that he himself had contributed to by his actions. When everything was completed, I returned home to my parents. The warmth of family comfort, peace, and support that surrounded me filled my heart with warmth. Soon I found an occupation for myself that not only brought income, but also allowed me to feel needed. I started teaching sewing, and although my classes were small, over time the neighbors, their wives, and children began to find in me an ally and mentor. With each lesson, when I showed them how to deftly handle a needle, turning a simple piece of fabric into an elegant dress or a cozy blanket, I realized that these moments brought me the happiness that I missed so much. The dream of having my own children sewing next to me was still far away, But now I found joy in sharing my knowledge and my heart with those who came to me.